when I'm running a show, we're working on a show. Like no one has a stopwatch out. We're never thinking, well, at 15 minutes this has to happen instead. Like it just doesn't work that way. It's such a bizarre. In my mind, it's almost fascinating to hear you say that because it's like, wow, we don't do any of that. So like, it seems to me, it's making it unnecessarily hard and like it doesn't. It's not helpful.
You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin.
All right, everyone, welcome to the big show. Today we're talking about specs versus pilots. What does that mean? I don't even know. I got to think this through, Phil.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I one time took a kid to lunch in film school, and I told him what I was working on. And I remember thinking, he brought this up, and he was just using this terminology. And I know like what a spec versus a pilot is, and I know what a spec versus a commission is, but he used them interchangeably. And so I think there might be some confusion about these, especially in the world of television.
Yeah, because a lot of the words are kind of used interchangeably. It's unnecessarily complicated. But basically, when you try to get a show, or you're trying to get staffed on a show, you need a writing sample. And so your writing sample could be an original piece of work, like a pilot that you've written about, you've created, it's all yours. Or you could spec an existing show. So you write a sample episode of the show Barry or whatever. And so that's two different samples that you could show people.
And the spec stands for speculation, meaning you're writing it on speculation that you could sell it, or that I think that's where it comes from, the film world, right?
Right.
I'm writing it on spec versus I've been hired to do this job.
Right. So you're right. In other words, no one's paying you for it, but the odds of selling
it's an assumption of risk, I think, is really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
So Writers Guild says if you sell a feature on spec, you get paid more because you took the risk of writing it on your own dime,
right,
versus them hiring you to do a job, and now you're getting paid less because they're assuming the risk.
That's right. That's right.
So I think that's where the terminology comes from. Go ahead.
But truthfully, the odds of you selling your spec pilot are very, very low. It's really just a calling card. It's a sample of your work to get you a job on a show so that you rise up the ranks and you earn the right at some point in the future to sell a show. So most people think, well, I got a show, I'm going to sell it. It's like, it doesn't really work that way. It doesn't work that way for me, and I've been doing it for 26 years. So it's not going to work that way for Joe Average in the middle of Indiana, right? So,
right.
Okay, so back in the day, when I was coming up, there were 4 networks. So there wasn't a lot of choice. So everyone kind of knew the same shows. The big hit shows everyone watched, or at least sampled, they knew a little bit about. So you would write a spec episode of, like, say Seinfeld or Cheers or Friends, or on the drama side, you might write a spec ER. Everyone knew those shows. So whoever was reading your shows would know the tone of it, they know the characters, and you'd write your spec episode of that show, and people would read it and they get, okay, yeah, I've seen the show enough to know that this is a good sample or not. But today, the market is, there's so many shows out there, and there are no giant hits anymore. And so there's not one show that everyone is watching, really. There's shows that, like, people that are popular shows, like, let's say, like Barry, or let's say Ted Lasso. People seem to watch those shows, but it's not like it gets the millions and millions of views that everyone else, all the other shows used to get. It's still like a tiny share. So the way the agents and studio executives, what they recommend is not to write a spec episode of an existing show, since no one really knows that language anymore. They want you to write a spec episode they want you to write an episode or a pilot episode of something that came out of your own head, an original idea, an original pilot, and use that as a writing sample to get you work. Mm-hmm. But there's a problem with that, in my opinion.
Okay.
And the problem is writing an episode for characters that already exist is actually a lot easier than creating a brand new show from whole cloth, and it's a whole different skill set. And if you're trying to get on a staff of a TV show, you don't need that skill set. You don't need to know how to create characters and create a world. Like, all you need to know is can I mimic the world that already exists? So I feel that's an unfair burden that studio executives and agents or managers are kind of putting on new writers. Like, they're saying, hey, this is much harder, but this is what you need to do because the world has changed so much, the world of TV at least. And, like I said, as a showrunner, I don't really care if you can create these characters. I want to know if you can write an episode for my characters, for my world. Mm-hmm. And also, as a showrunner, it's harder for me to read those scripts because now it's like, like I can read an episode of Friends, and I know I'm dating myself by saying Friends. Okay, let's say Two and a Half Men or The Big Bang Theory or something a little more recent. I can I know those characters. I know how they talk. I know how they should sound. I'm familiar with them, and it's easier for me. It's a lot less work for me to read a script and determine whether you are doing a good job mimicking that tone. But for you, when you create your own world, it's like, okay, now I got to. Who are these characters again? I got to flip back. I got to remind myself who this character is, and I got to remind myself, wait, what's the tone of this show supposed to be? Is it supposed to be silly, or is it supposed to be broad? And so it's more work on my end, and it's a lot more work on the person who has to write it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so what you're saying is the job of a staff writer is to mimic the showrunner's voice. And although the pilot can show creativity, it doesn't showcase that skill set.
Yeah, we don't need to know. We don't need to know if you can create a show. That'll come years later when you create your own show. Mm-hmm. So it's a bummer. But when you create one, okay, we have to accept the fact that you really don't have any choice here. Let's say you have to create all these pilots. Now you're going to want to create many pilots in different tones because, and by tone I mean, is it broad or is it real? Is it grounded? Is it crazy? Is it wacky? On The Simpsons, Homer went to the moon. Where on Family Guy, Peter gets murdered every episode, or he chops Lois's legs off, and then suddenly she has legs in the next scene, or he'll shoot his daughter in the face. Like that's just off the board, wacko, crazy. That show's a really fun show, but the tone of that is like almost fantastical. Mm-hmm. Whereas a show like BoJack Horseman, even though he's a talking horse, it's much more realistic. He deals with issues of psychology and real problems of people. So it's a much more grounded show, even though he's a talking horse.
Mm. Okay, and so in the past, if I was writing samples of shows, I would want to take that same note and I would say, I want to be able to write a Barry, which is a completely different tone than, say, Big Bang Theory. Or different than any other
And also,
sitcom.
and those, for example, and Barry, by the way, is a single camera show, and Big Bang was a multi-camera show. And if you don't know the difference, so a single camera show kind of looks like a movie. It's shot like a movie. Often they use two cameras at the same time they're shooting it, but it's called single camera. Whereas a multi-camera show, sometimes called a four-camera show, or I'm going to make it confusing. Sometimes it's called a 3 or 4 camera show. But a multi-camera show is shot on a soundstage live in front of a studio audience. So you hear those laughters, and it's very proscenium. It's shot like it's like going to theater. So those characters never, they never leave the theater. They exist only on that stage. Whereas a single camera show, like let's say Big Modern Family, they would shoot that on location. They'd go to this location, that location, and the writing style is a little different. You both have to understand story, like a great understanding of story for both, but the way they're written. There's a slight difference.
Yeah, there's some formatting differences too, right?
Yeah, and those multi-camera shows tend to be joke heavier because you have a studio audience and there's that pressure to keep them laughing when you shoot it. And so those shows, you record a multi-camera show, in both a single camera and a multi-camera show, you are, and I know that's not really what we're supposed to be talking about, but I find myself fascinated by my own voice, so I'm going to continue.
Let's go.
On a single camera show, it takes about a week to shoot, and a multi-camera show takes a week to shoot. But the production schedules are very different. A multi-camera show, you have a day where you rehearse, you put on a show on Friday night and in front of an audience. But on that Monday is the first day of rehearsal, and you rehearse it day 2, you rehearse it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and finally, Friday you put up on its feet. Whereas a single camera show, on Monday you have a rehearsal, like a table read where the actors just read it, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're shooting the damn thing. You are shooting it. So, and it's because it takes longer to shoot. So there's less rehearsal for those. So by nature of that, because you have so much more rehearsal for a multi-camera show, each line is really crafted and to make it as funny as possible. There's a lot of pressure to make the jokes really pop, whereas a single camera show, you don't really have that same pressure.
And on a multi-camera show, you've done several of those in your
I've done both.
Yeah, so in that world, you as the writer of that episode would be on set or on the stages while they're shooting, right? Just to rewrite some things.
For a multi-camera show, all the writers are on set all the time.
Got it.
All the time. A single camera show, because it takes so long to shoot it, there's usually only one writer on set, and that might be the showrunner, or it might be someone in the showrunner's proxy. It might be a proxy, which could be the person who wrote that episode, or it could be, let's say, a co-executive producer.
Got it. So because I'm not doing specs anymore, I'm assuming that the spec work is the real work that helps you prepare for the job of being a staff writer, because you are watching a show, you're internalizing the voices, the characters, and you're crafting stories that fit into that world and match that tone.
Yeah.
Likewise, I could do the same thing in the world of a pilot, but that seems like a lot more work, because I have to create the characters, the setting, the reason these people are together.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, it seems like easier and better practice to do the spec, even though people are asking for a pilot.
Yeah. And if you're spec, by the way, if it's a show that, like, all comedy writers know Barry. We've all watched Barry. So, like, I think that'd be okay show to spec, even though it's not known by the billions of people in the outside world. I think they'd be perfectly fine to spec that. Same thing with maybe Ted Lasso, which people seem to really like. Those would probably be good specs. Right. And I, like I said, I would prefer to read that. Then I'm just judging it in terms of, like, okay, does this person understand story structure? How is their dialogue? Is it punchy? Does it flow? Does it sound like the dialogue in the existing show? I don't need to know the other stuff, the other factors that go into creating a TV show. It doesn't help me. I don't need that.
Okay. And so I write these specs, I write these spec pilots, I practice them. And so I think that begs the question, like, how does one approach both of these situations? And so I just want to walk you through what I was taught in film school in my television writing class. Yeah. And I want you to tell me if you think this seems like a good format.
Fail.
Okay, sounds good.
You've already failed.
All right, that's the end of the episode. I do think that there were some things lacking here, because as I've worked with you, as I've sat in writers' rooms as a writer's PA, as I've sat on set, as I've seen rewrites of episodes, I've noticed that there are things that we didn't address per se in our classes.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. What we were taught to do was basically watch multiple episodes of the TV show, which sounds like a good idea. And then we were basically instructed to take a stopwatch and time every single scene and count the number of scenes and basically just put them into a spreadsheet and say, this act, before this commercial break, there were this many scenes and they took this long and added together. I can expect my act one for this show to be this long.
Yeah. I would never approach when I'm running a show. We're working on a show. No one has a stopwatch out. We're never thinking, well, at 15 minutes this has to happen, and 7. Like, it just doesn't work that way. It's such a bizarre. In my mind, it's almost fascinating to hear you say that, because it's like, whoa, we don't do any of that. So, like, it seems to me, it's making it unnecessarily hard, and like, it's not helpful.
I think what I took from that is what's happening in these scenes more than how long are these scenes taking, or what are the number of scenes. Mm-hmm. It was really looking at, who is leading this scene, who is leading these. And I think that the reason that was interesting to me is because you and I had already had some back and forth about what story structure should look like.
Yeah.
But in general, what I noticed when we got to the next step, 2 steps down. So then we break our own story, we kind of fit it into this formula, and then we do a table read. And what I noticed is that most of the table read scripts, the scripts that we table read in our class, they were a lot of people doing things, but a lot of nothing happening.
Oh, the characters, you mean?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't like we were really pushing towards one big thing. It wasn't like we had any real focus or drive through these.
Yeah.
There were moments of action and there were moments of conversation, but it was almost like every single scene was set up to be its own unique act, and they didn't really take me anywhere.
Yeah, it sounds like you got bogged down in the minutia, but you missed the bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think it's because there was just a general lack of conversation about actual story structure, rather than, here's how many scenes you should have versus sequences you should have versus...
It's like when I could walk as a TV writer, even though I'm in comedy, I could walk into any writer's room in Hollywood if they let me, if there were a writer's room not on Zoom anymore because of the pandemic. But I could walk into any writer's room, drama, comedy, whatever, and jump right in and fit right in, because we all speak the same language, which is story. And none of us are talking about holding stopwatches and that's not how we approach story.
Right. So I know the answer to this, but, just playing devil's advocate, which I know we just tore apart recently. Yeah. So obviously you're talking about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and myth structure then.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I've read that. It's a seminal work. It's important. It's interesting to read. But if that Joseph Campbell, and I'm not denigrating it at all, but if it was helpful in terms of breaking a story, you'd think that would be that famous chart would be on every writer's room in Hollywood. We would just be referring to the chart all the time to how to tell a story, and we just don't. And to me, it's almost like reverse engineering something, where it's like, okay, I'm going to make a robot. Let's take apart this robot, and now we know how to make a robot. It's like, no, you know how to take apart a robot. It doesn't mean you know how to build a robot. You just took one apart.
Right.
And so that to me was what that hero's journey circle reminds me of. Hi guys, Michael Jamin here. I wanted to take a break from talking and talk just a little bit more. I think a lot of you guys are getting bad advice on the internet. I know this because I'm getting tagged. One guy tagged me with this. He said, I heard from a scriptreader in the industry. And I was like, wait, what? Hold on, stop. My head blew up, I blacked out. And when I finally came to, I was like, listen, dude, there are no script readers in the industry. By definition, these are people on the outside of the industry. They work part-time, they give their right arm to be in the industry, and instead they're giving you advice on what to do, and you're paying for this? I mean, that just made me nuts, man. These people are unqualified to give my dog advice. And by the way, her script is coming along quite nicely. And I'm not done. Another thing, when I work with TV writers who are new on writing staffs, a lot of these guys flame out after 13 episodes. So they get this big break, they finally get in, and then they flame out because they don't know what is expected of them on the job. And that's sad because, it's not going to happen again. So to fight all this, to flush all this bad stuff out of your head, I post daily tips on social media. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook at Michael Jamin Writer. If you don't have time, 2 minutes a day to devote towards improving your craft, guys, it's not going to happen. Let's just be honest. So go find me, make it happen. All right, now back to my previous rant.
So because I've been through your course and I've seen how stories are broken in an actual writer's room, there are definitely almost beats. There are things that need to exist to help carry the story along. But that's just more like what I would call tent poles that would hold up the structure.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the foundation. Yeah.
The foundation. And then you do it, your story fits into that to help kind of guide us along, because there's like an internal expectation in ourselves as humans, been telling stories for millennia, that resonates with this. And I think that's where Joseph Campbell's stuff kind of correlates here. But in general, these are things that weren't really addressed. Like, back behind me, I've got like a wall of filmmaking and screenwriting books. I have Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Phases. I have Chris Vogler's The Writer's Journey. The Writer's Journey I got because it was a required text for our class. And yet, we never read it in class. We never opened it. We never talked about that.
That was in film school.
That was in film school, specifically my TV writing class. So ultimately, I think what it boils down to is this process that I learned isn't actually the way you do things. And it's not helpful because we're missing, as you said, the foundational things. We're so focused on the other stuff.
And it's interesting to study all that little stuff, but it's just not how we do it on a daily basis. So, I don't know why they teach. I get a little frustrated when I get on my soapbox when we talk about film school, and I always say, like, make sure you're clear on who you're studying from, because you can study from screenwriting from a professional teacher, but if they haven't done it for years and years and years, like, they're just teaching you what they learned, what they were taught. You're not, like, I didn't go to film school and I didn't study any of this. Most of what I learned on the job from other writers, professional writers before me. And so I just do it the way they taught me. And that's how we do it in the world.
So it's the apprenticeship model, right? Where you go in and you learn through osmosis and through putting in the sweat equity.
Yeah, and that's how I teach in the course. I'm like, well, I don't mess around with like theory. I go, okay, let's take an idea. Here's an idea. How do we stretch this? Is it a good enough idea that will fill, let's say, 22 minutes of a TV show, or if it's a drama, obviously longer? Is there enough meat on that bone to turn it into 22 minutes? And if so, how do you unfold all the events that occurs in the plot so that it feels like an engaging story, so that people are engaged and want to know what happens next? And I just do that by the way I was taught. So the course, that's how I run the course. It's like, okay, you're gonna pretend you're in my writer's room. We're gonna take an idea. And we're gonna turn it into an episode of TV, and we're not gonna talk theory. We're gonna do it.
So when you're reading these things, and we've talked again on this podcast quite a bit about you have to be good at your craft. Sounds like that's the quintessential thing here, is you need to be able to tell a story that follows the proper structure, and then entertain me is secondary to that.
Yeah, and to be clear, when my partner and I first landed on TV shows, like we didn't know how to do any of this. Like we were able to write a decent enough story from our gut, and it was good enough, but we didn't know. We certainly couldn't have done it on a consistent basis, like week after week. We couldn't have been like a showrunner, but as you work on a show and you rise up to the ranks and you start making more money, more is expected of you. And so sooner or later, you need to learn how to do this story breaking, know how to tell a story. Because if you can't learn that, you will hit a glass ceiling, and then you will eventually be out of work.
Got it. Do you have any recommendations on how to approach, picking a show to follow, or to spec, or to follow and match the tone, or go ahead.
I do. Like I remember years ago working with hiring a young writer, and he's kind of, we weren't really rehiring. He was kind of, we were told he's going to be on our show, and so okay, the studio said that. We're like, okay, got it. And I remember asking him, "Are you a drama, or would you consider yourself a drama or a comedy writer?" He goes, "Oh, I do both." And I remember in my mind thinking, "Okay, you do neither," because if you're a comedy guy, you say you just know you're comedy. I think comedy writers can do drama, but drama writers, they can't do comedy. It's not like you could say, yeah, I could write funny, but it's like, either you can or you can't. It's not like something I don't know if I'm explaining it well. It's like you have to have a good sense of humor to write comedy. You can't, it's not like any drama writer can write comedy. A comedy writer can write drama because you're just leaving out the funny parts. You're just not making it funny. You're telling a story, it's just not a funny story. But it's all story.
But it's not, that's I think an important note. It's not, how can I be as funny as possible? It's the thing that makes those shows so amazing are they keep you laughing, and then in one moment you're crying, right? Like they hit you in the gut because it's so emotionally real that you relate to it.
Yeah, and that's actually why the hours on a sitcom tend to be a lot worse than hours on a drama, because in both cases you're telling a story is story, but in one you have to make it funny, and the funny part that adds an extra layer of difficulty, because not all ideas are funny, as we know. So
pick your lane, pigeonhole yourself, right?
I think so. I think it's important to pigeonhole yourself, because that's what you're saying. That's how you're marketing yourself. If you say to someone, I can do anything you want, all right, I don't really know what you want. But if you say, I'm really great at writing broad, wacky comedies, ooh, that's what I need. Yeah. That's what I need. Don't make me do if I'm going to hire, don't make me do the work of figuring out what you are. You tell me what you are. Tell me you're great at it. And then if that's what I need, I'll hire you.
Yeah, in the marketing world, we would call this niching down, or niching down if you want to be more appropriate. But yeah. Niching down, and we try to keep it clean, but the other term I've heard in the marketing world is the niche is the bitch. Uh-huh. Like your niche is what separates you from everybody else.
Yeah.
It is what makes you the specialized expert.
I think people are worried about, well, I don't want to limit my opportunities, because I don't care what I write, whether it's a drama or a comedy or broad or grounded. But honestly, you are helping yourself get hired by getting in that lane and becoming good at that lane. It's going to be easier for you to get hired.
Yeah. So it's like if one of my e-commerce clients came to me and said, I want to be the next Walmart online. I want to sell everything under the sun. Right. I would say, okay, how many hundreds of millions of dollars do you have? Yeah. And I'd be like, what? Versus someone says, hey, we're a specialty craftsman and we make the super fine, rare wood cutting boards. Right. Can you help me? I'd be like, absolutely. I could sell that all day. Because there's a niche there, which means less competition, less. Yeah. It's very people looking for very specific things. Yeah, you're more likely to be able to be marketable there. And it's the old adage from businesses: if everyone's your customer, no one's your customer.
Yeah, right. There's another example from our life. So my wife has drives a Mini Cooper, and she could get that repaired at any mechanic could work on it, but there's a guy, I don't know, 20 miles away, who only works on Mini Coopers, and she insists on driving to him because he's a specialist in Mini Coopers. That's all he does, and he knows it inside and out. Now, that doesn't limit this guy. That mechanic could work on any car, probably. I mean, he could work on BMWs for sure. It's close enough to a Mini Cooper. They own Mini Cooper. But by saying that's all he does, all the Mini Cooper owners flood to him. So he has, the pie is smaller, but he has a larger share of it. So you should be a specialist too. This is what I'm really great at.
Yeah, I love that. So you pick your lane, you've pigeonholed yourself, you've picked your niche, and now you're finding what kinds of shows. You've talked about Ted Lasso and you talked about Barry. It seems like you should be matching the type of, to me it makes sense. I want to have something that shows the type of tone for the job I'm applying for.
Yeah.
So that would dictate to me that it's not just about having one great pilot. It's about having a pilot that matches the tone of a Barry or a Ted Lasso or a multicam that's really popular, that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. And so the rules, by the way, the rules that apply to someone who's new my rules are a little different. Because I've been doing this so long, I can write a broad show, I can write a grounded show, a single camera, multicam, an animated. I can do it all. If you're just starting out, then I would recommend figuring out what tone you think you're going to be great at and going down that lane. And then if you like, then you want to branch out a little bit. Like, okay, I've written a spec for a broad show. Let me try writing a spec for a grounded show. And you write one of those and make it as good as you can. You know,
I started earlier by saying it seems like writing that many pilots seems incredibly daunting because it's so much work. You have to create the world and characters. And this is again, I apologize bringing it back to the business world, but I think it's a very valid point. My mentor who taught me how to do e-commerce and digital marketing, he was talking specifically about how to sell things on Amazon because Amazon lets third-party sellers sell things. In fact, most of the time you're buying things, they're probably from a third-party seller. Mm-hmm. And they have very strict regulations on who can sell what and what you need to have to sell things on there. And they do that to protect the customer. And whenever we would train and do consulting at businesses about how to list their products on Amazon, he would bring up this point. A lot of people look at that and say, oh, well, it's so much work, I don't know if it's worth it. And he said, you should be praising Amazon because they have made it so difficult that the riffraff will stay out.
Yeah.
It's just gatekeeping. And basically what it's saying is if you're worthy enough to pass this threshold, then you're going to succeed because we have what you want and we're basically weeding out the lazy people. And and it goes back to another thing he said. He said, ultimately you win in business by doing more than your competitor will. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I hear that seems difficult or whenever I feel that, I might go, oh man, that's daunting and I don't want to do that. That's kind of my benchmark for that's something I absolutely need to do because it sets me apart from everybody else.
Exactly. There's a lot of free work that you have to do to get a job. You have to write all this writing spec scripts. That's free. No one's paying you to do that. If the idea of doing free work turns you off, then writer is not the profession for you. So, but yeah, you have to do, and like you're pointing out, like when something's hard or requires a lot of work, I'm always like, oh, good. That'll weed out all the people who are not serious about it. That just cuts my competition down like immensely.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and as we discussed already too, and I know other screenwriting podcasts have talked about, it is almost easier to be in the NFL than it is to be a working writer. And so you have to approach it as a professional, not as a hobbyist. Like this is what you do because this is who you are. And it's almost like it needs to become part of what your identity is.
Yeah. Yeah, how often do you write? Well, the answer is every day, all the time. And when I'm not writing, well, I'm thinking about writing or I'm taking notes about what I want to work on next. And so, like, if you want to compete, you or anybody listening wants to compete with me, you're going to have to step up your game because this is what I do. So if you're not willing to do what I do, well, you're coming after my job. So this is what I do. You want to come after my job? You better be working hard.
Yeah, great stuff. Again, thanks, Michael, for all of this good stuff. Do you have anything else you think is valuable on the spec or pilot?
I think that's it. We got more pilot. We got more episodes of our podcast coming. I'll have something to say next time.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody else. Make sure leave a review. Share this with somebody else who needs to hear this episode.
Yeah,
we'll catch you on the next one.
By all means, and follow me on Instagram. I got smart things to say on Instagram at Michael Jamin Writer.
Yeah, again, the members of your course have all said that that's where your gems are. That's where all the gems of information live. So.
Yeah, we're all there.
This has been an episode of Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin and Phil Hudson. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with someone who needs to hear today's subject. If you're looking to support yourself, I'd encourage you to consider investing in Michael's screenwriting course at michaeljamin.com/course. I've known Michael for over a decade, and in the past 7 years, I've begged him to put something together. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, Michael had time, and I have to say, I wish I'd had this course 10 years ago. As someone who's personally invested in most online courses, earned a bachelor's degree, and actively studied screenwriting for over a decade, this course has been more valuable to me than most of the effort I've put in because it focuses on something no one else teaches: story. In his course, Michael pulls back the curtain and shows you exactly what the pros do in a writer's room, and that knowledge has made all the difference for me, and I know it will for you too. You can find more information at michaeljamin.com/course. For free daily screenwriting tips, follow Michael on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at michaeljaminwriter. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Phil A. Hudson. This episode was produced by Phil Hudson and edited by Dallas Crane. Until next time, keep writing.